Necromancer has consistently been the weakest class in the game season after season after season, yet despite this, Necromancer receives nothing but nerfs season after season after season. I have no idea what is going on at Blizzard. I don't know what data they're looking at, but the state of Necromancer has reached one that is completely unacceptable. A lot of Necromancer's weakness is coming from the fact that our skill tree is just straight up incomplete. When you look at our skill tree and you look at our utility options, you have Blood Mist, Bone Prison's not really playable, Iron Maiden is not playable, you have Decrepify, and you have Corpse Tendrils. And then you can take an ultimate, and that's it. There's nothing else on the skill tree. Like I said, Iron Maiden unplayable, Bone Prison unplayable. There's no other options for builds. Imagine playing a Barbarian with no Shouts and no Ground Stomp. Imagine playing Sork with no Blink, no Ice Armor, none of that stuff. And this plays out in the data too. Necromancer has 4 to 5 less skills than any other class. And despite this, Necromancer also has the least number of passives. Necro's passive tree is completely bare bones. In fact, it is extremely difficult to actually spend all of your points. You can see in this Bloodwave build, I'm running things like Necrotic Fortitude for barrier generation, even though this does nothing for my build. This is because I have no way to spend my points unless I take extremely minor, like sub 1% upgrades. The skill tree is extremely barren, it's very hard to spend your points, and as a result, Necromancer has been extremely weak since Season 0. Yet despite this, Necromancer has received mostly nerfs since the launch of the game. Now, in Season 0, we did have Bone Spear, which is a pretty good build, but they absolutely wrecked Bone Spear to the point where now I don't even think you should put Bone Spear on tier list anymore because the build is so bad, anybody who plays it is just wasting their time. In Season 1, we had the Ring of Mendeln build, which was a really cool build, but it got absolutely shredded in this rework that has completely destroyed the entire archetype of Ring of Mendeln. This whole archetype of build is completely dead. In Season 2, we finally got some real content so we could compare classes to each other in the form of AOZ. So, how did Necromancer stack up? Necromancer's best clear in AOZ was a 23. It was the only class that didn't do a 25, and it did it as a rank 185 clear. This is the best Necromancer clear we got that season. Necromancer clearly pretty weak. Yet, despite this, Necromancer's build that season got absolutely gutted, with one of the most annihilating nerfs I've ever seen in this game, with the nerfs to Infinimist. This build got shredded after Season 2. Nerfs to Lucky Hit, the base damage, nerfs to the Lucky Hit and the Blighted Corpse Explosion damage, massively reducing the power level of the build and removing it for Season 3. Moving on to Season 3, we got another official leaderboard in the form of Gauntlet, where Necromancer was the lowest performing class. Because Necromancer has no mobility, because Necromancer has so few skills in their skill tree, Necromancer simply can't compete in something like Gauntlet. This in Season 2 are problems with like survivability and damage, plus mobility of course, but moving into Season 3 with Gauntlet where the content was super easy, Necromancer actually had a fantastic ability for this in the form of Blood Surge, but because of Necromancer's incredibly weak mobility, it couldn't compete with the other classes. And actually, they buffed us after Season 3, which was great. And you might be wondering, how did those buffs go going into Season 4? A lot of people seem to have thought Necromancer was really strong in Season 4, but this is untrue, actually. As you can see in Season 4, Necromancer's highest clear was a 127, which puts it as the second worst class in the game. Now, thank God we for once weren't the worst class in the game, and so, but going into Season 5, what we expected was buffs, right? What we expected was, okay, second worst class in the game, lowest mobility, least amount of damage besides Druid, and the least amount of survivability in the game by far. What we expected was buffs, going from Season 4 to 5, and instead what we got were ginormous nerfs that absolutely shredded most of Necromancer's builds. The Blighted aspect nerf was absolutely insane. The nerf to Corpse Tendrils, Grasping Veins, insane. And the result of this is that all of these Necro builds that used to be like B and C tier builds overall dropped all the way from like that to like D and F tier to unplayable, and Necromancer's meta builds also dropped significantly. The result in Season 5, Necromancer was the weakest class in Season 5. In fact, Necromancer was so weak, we only had one build that could do Tier 8 hordes with any degree of efficiency at all, which was, the Blood Surge build I created, which, I'm really proud of this build, I'm really happy about it. But the reality is, every single class in the game has put up better scores than Blood Surge. Druid did, Rogue did, Sork did, and Barbarian did. And this is with me playing Blood Surge for weeks and weeks and weeks, absolutely blasting, min-maxing, perfecting the build, and trying to push the highest score I possibly could solo time and time again. And despite this, we just got buried by every other class because, again, of Necromancer's low mobility and also because of the inconsistent damage of Blood Surge. Yet, despite this, Necromancer's Blood Surge actually got massively nerfed going into the next season. So, what did they nerf? Well, first of all, they reduced... This is going into PTR now. So, before we get into what they're nerfing, let's first reiterate, Necromancer has consistently been insanely weak, yet has been consistently nerfed. On every leaderboard Necromancer has had, Necromancer's either been the worst performing class or, once we were the second worst performing class. Yet, despite this, all we get are nerfs. So, what did they nerf about Blood Surge? For starters, they nerfed the lucky hit chance, which is a huge hit to our single target because we rely on corpse generation, procs of hewed flesh for our single target damage, and this was a huge nerf. They also nerfed Wrathman's Vigor, where it's now 15 seconds instead of 12 seconds, which is a huge nerf to the amount of overpowers you get per second. And then, finally, they nerfed the Starlight aspect, so that the Starlight aspect is now capped, and whenever you overheal with Starlight, you have to heal for 10 times as much to get your essence back. This means the entire Lucian Starlight combo, the essence generation, is dead. And keep in mind, with Starlight, yes, it's a generic aspect. The only other build in the game, I talked to top players for every single class, the only other high-level build in the game that was playing Starlight was Deathblow Barbarian, which had a play rate, I would assume, of below 3%. This nerf was entirely directed at Necromancer. And so you can see Blood Surge got absolutely kneecapped. But it doesn't stop there. There was a huge amount of nerfs to other skills, including Blood Lance. I don't know why, but Blood Lance went from overpowering every 6th cast to overpowering every 8th cast. This change makes no sense, and anyone who's playing the game knows that Blood Lance sucks. I don't know why it was nerfed. On top of that, they also nerfed all of our basic skills besides Decompose. So Reap can now only spawn a corpse every 5 seconds instead of every 4. No idea why. The essence generation of Hemorrhage was nerfed, and the essence generation of damage of Bone Splinters was nerfed. I guess this was because we had that Bone Splinters build that could do Horde 7, while every other build in the game is obliterating Horde 8, but for some reason they decided to nerf Bone Splinters. But not to worry, because they did buff Bone Spirit again, which, okay, whatever. And, there's more nerfs. There's, like, the Blinded Corpse Centrals nerfs. There's all kinds of random nerfs in this tree. And, for a lot of you guys, you might be thinking, okay, maybe they nerfed all of the classes. No, dude. No, they mostly only nerfed Necromancer. The only other... So I've talked to top players from every other class. The only other build I know of that got nerfed was Sork's highest performing build, and it's still projected to be the best build in the game from what I've heard from them. So what you're looking at is, like, Druid is still astronomically stronger than Necro. Or even astronomically stronger than it was last season, and it was already astronomically stronger than Necro. Same with Barb, same with Rogue, same with Sork. And don't even get me started on Spiritborn. Spiritborn buries every other class, but we'll see what happens with that. But the point is that despite being the lowest performing class in the game, despite being consistently the weakest class, all we got was nerfs going into the season. Now, let's talk about the new things, okay? This is what I was most excited for. As we discussed, Necromancer's skill tree is bare bones. It is actually hard to spend your skill points, and because every build has to run Blood Mist Decrepifying Corpse Tendrils because there's literally nothing else here. Now, keep in mind, other classes might have to run, like, certain abilities because they're the best, but for Necro, we have to run them because, like, Iron Maiden literally does nothing, Bone Prison literally does nothing, and then there's nothing else. That's literally it. So we have to play these 3 skills. And going into the season, what I was expecting was a huge buff to our skill tree across the board, and what I was expecting was to get more utility skills, so we actually have options. Instead, what we got is better Bone Storm in the form of Soul Rift, and then better Shadow Blight in the form of Affliction. So why do I say Soul Rift is just better Bone Storm? Well, everything that you used to do to play Bone Storm, and every build that you used to play Bone Storm, all of this just transfers straight into Soul Rift. Whether you're talking about Bone Spear, whether you're talking about Blood Surge, whether you're talking about Blood Lance, any build that used to play Bone Storm, you now just play Soul Rift, because it does everything Bone Storm does, but better and cheaper and faster and easier to get online. The ability has a base cooldown that is much lower than Bone Storm. It does more damage than Bone Storm. It generates Barrier with no investment. It generates Essence. It gives you a bigger damage multiplier. It applies Vulnerable, and the damage multiplier stays after the Soul Rift ends. Everything about this ability is just better than Bone Storm. Nobody's going to play Bone Storm anymore. And in a vacuum, it's like, cool, we got a buff. But instead of, like, giving us new tools to work with, instead of giving us deeper ways to make builds, they instead just gave us a replacement. And it's the same thing with Affliction. Shadow Blight is the worst key passive in the game, and there's nothing even close to it. Shadow Blight is complete dog tier, and the only reason any build ever played Shadow Blight was because you had so many skill points you couldn't spend them on anything productive, so you would take Shadow Blight because it'd be about 1% damage. But Affliction just says 15%. So all Shadow builds now play Affliction. In fact, a lot of Necro builds play Affliction because 15% is better than any other key passive most builds have access to. I believe this is going to include minions, and it definitely includes every single Shadow build. This is completely unwanted. What we need is a rework to Shadow Blight to make Shadow builds playable. Yes, I think in a vacuum, Affliction would actually be kind of cool, turning our curses into core skills. However, when you look at this skill tree, we don't need core skills, we need utility skills. Necromancer is depraved when it comes to skills. Now, you might be wondering where all of this leaves us. Well, the reality is that Necromancer has gone from being consistently one of the most popular classes to being the least popular. That's based on data I got from Maxroll, based on data I got from Icy Veins, based on data I got from Wildhead, and based on data from Mobalytics. The fact of the matter is that Necromancer is now the least popular class in the game based on everything we've seen. So players are leaving Necro, the devs don't seem to care about Necro, and what's crazy is when somebody makes a post like this, right? This guy made a post breaking down like Necro has the least amount of active skills, Necro has the least amount of passives, Necro also has the least amount of key passives until Spiritborn, and all he gets is shit on. And I think the reason for this is because I think everyone who cares about Necromancer and cares about deep and interesting builds and cares about interesting stuff has already quit the class. Like this guy right here saying that you ignore the Book of the Dead / summon capacity, that's untrue. This 20 is including Book of the Dead. I don't know what this guy's talking about, but this is completely untrue. And whenever you try to talk about this stuff, everyone just ignores you. Here, this post here, Necromancer has used the same 3 skills, Blood, Mystic, Rectifying, Corpse Tendrils in every build, but this guy says he doesn't use any of those skills on his minion build. That leaves me the question of, what skill are you running? If you're not playing Blood Mist, you're not playing Decrepify, you're not playing Corpse Tendril, like, what, are you playing Iron Maiden? Like, this does nothing for your build. Are you playing Bone Prison? This does nothing for your build. And this is where we're at. We end up getting into arguments with people who, like, no offense to Chicken Nugget Lover, okay? But frankly, based on this comment, you can tell this guy doesn't make top-end builds. And these are the kind of people you're fighting against when you're trying to get this class fixed. So the devs don't care about what's going on. The community doesn't seem to care. But why am I caring? It's because I love this class, man. And I love this game. And I really think that this class can be so sick. I think this game can be so sick. I think the changes coming in Season 6 are all really good. I think the game is getting significantly better. I just want to play a cool class that is really fun, that has interesting builds in this new cool world. And when I talk to people who play other classes, everyone says really positive things about the changes for their classes. And it makes me sad that, like, Necromancer is just left in this state where it's hard to spend your skill points, where you're throwing things into Necrotic Fortitude because you have nothing else to spend points on, where every single build is playing the same 3 skills, where our new key passives and new ultimates are just replacement to old things. And that to see the play rate of Necromancer dropping so much is really sad. And I just want the devs to make Necro cool again. I want them to make it interesting again. I want them to make the changes that I know they're capable of making. I just want them to start taking Necromancer seriously. And, it'll make me enjoy the game a lot more personally. And I think that this is what you have to do if you want to stop the bleeding of the Necro community. Like I said, a lot of the people who care about this stuff are already left. And now even most of the casuals are leaving. The class is dying and we need help. Tell Blizzard how you feel, if you agree with me, and let's try to make Necromancer fun again, all right? And I'll see you guys in Season 6. Peace.